Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more. Hey y'all, Kelly here, and you're listening to episode 18 of the Ground Shots podcast. I just reunited with my camper home in Mendocino County, California, after a month on the island of Kauai in Hawaii, and I am pretty tired from a lot of moving around. Feeling really grateful too for all of the experiences I've had the past few months. But right now I am trying to just take a little time to recover from all the movement and catch up on a little writing and attempt to hermit a little bit, which is really something I need to do. And it's just so intense moving across the land so fast, especially as someone who notices so much and takes in so much information. So I'm readjusting right now as well to a dry and hot environment from spending a month in a jungle-like place, really humid and moist, rainy, and I was pretty much living outside the whole time. So it's all very beautiful and amazing, the various ways the land expresses itself, but as a human on those landscapes, it's definitely an adjustment at times. And right now here in Mendocino, California, where I am staying for the week on my friend's land, a lot of things are in full bloom right here, and it's really special to see spring in California right now, catching the tail end of it. And I'm enjoying the bright orange California poppies that are all across the meadow here, and munching on some tough, soon to be tough, inner thistle stems. That was really sweet yesterday to eat some wild invasive thistle. And the smells in the air too. There's lavender flowering here on my friend's land, and I was just in the Bay Area for a couple days, and there's also lots of aromatic plants there flowering. So that helps me kind of ground in, like I said, with eating things too. The smells just really help me bring me back to my body right here. So this episode of the podcast features a conversation with Amy Armantrout, and this is one of the last recorded conversations from the end of last summer during my travels in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm gonna try in the future to not have so much time go by between recorded conversations and the release time. Despite this conversation being recorded last summer, the content of my conversation with Amy is certainly not outdated or irrelevant. Amy is a dear friend I met when we both went to herbal medicine school, and we also lived together during that time in North Carolina. We've remained friends all these years and kind of found each other all across the country. And in this conversation with Amy, which we recorded outside of Eugene, Oregon, we talk a lot about the concept of scavenging as a political act and a protest to consumerism. And Amy also runs a project called Scavenge Magic. And one of the things she does in that project is dye clothing naturally, primarily using black walnut, which is also a wild food and a wonderful medicine. She does this with used clothing to give them new life. We chat in this conversation about how this process of ritualistically dyeing used clothing is a kind of grief work for Amy. And we also talk about the beauty of mending, reworking, and giving life to old things. We also talk a little bit on the pros and cons of nomadism, which Amy has dabbled in over the years as well, and her parents have lived alternative lives, so we also talk about that and maybe how that influenced her own times of travel. We talk about the repercussions of our human disconnect from food and the land, questioning the forest as a resource, and a whole bunch more. So I've always really appreciated Amy's thoughtful insights, so I really hope that you do too in this conversation. Let's get to it, and happy listening, y'all.
Burn, burn with the light that reveals our faces. Burn, burn with the heat that will warm these places.
I grew up, I guess, in many places, still quite rooted in the suburbs. I mostly grew up with my mom and siblings in Colorado, suburbs. Yeah, very suburbia. But also had a very different experience of, as a young person, going to visit my dad from a pretty young age. Started visiting him during the summers, and he sort of moved all over the place.
Well, first, tell me about what you've been doing with natural dyes lately.
I guess lately, most of my interest with natural dyes has come about, really, I don't know, I'd call it more of an obsession than an interest in some sort of way, that I've been mostly working with, the hulls of Black Walnut. Actually, this is my trusty bucket right here sitting next to us. And it was actually, for me, just part of food processing that we found these amazing walnuts. And were actually so worth the time to process and dry the nuts that we got all their hulls off. And I was like, oh gosh, well, I might as well keep this, I know people die with this. And sort of turned into an obsession where all the, I also maybe obsessively go to thrift stores and overbuy thrift store clothes, especially the Goodwill bins. So, and for me that's a lot, especially at the bins. It's so much about just taking garments that at that point are destined for either the trash, the landfill, or another developing country, so-called, that probably doesn't want them, or it's a weird, convoluted situation that they're being sent there. So, just taking garments that would otherwise be sort of thrown out and giving them new life. And walnut particularly is really inspiring to me in that way because it's a very strong dye that will often dye over or change colors of synthetic dyes, and that particularly, most natural dyes work best with natural materials, so cottons and silks and wools, and those are most particularly garments that I'm interested in saving from being thrown out, because to me those things are precious and more enjoyable to wear on my skin than plastic. And so it just kind of turned into this thing, a way to sort of keep my spirits up during a really hard winter, was to keep this cauldron of walnut going on my wood stove, and to occasionally make trips to the Goodwill bins and just indulge in all sorts of treasures for whatever it is, $1 a pound. And just learned a lot from doing that, and that's sort of been what I've been up to. More recently, I'm doing some learning with friends, doing some leaf printing and things like that. And have done a little bit with other dyes, but to me, the walnut is just the most interesting as far as giving a different life to old garments. And even, there's just, I guess, so much to it, where also it feels to me so often I'm taking things that are really brightly colored and I'm muting them. And often turning them dirt colored, in this way that just feels like some kind of spell work of taking these really brightly colored things and just maybe ritually infusing them with some level of grief, planetary grief, that I carry a lot of, and yeah, boiling them in this like blackish liquid is yeah, it feels powerful, and it's yeah, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, other people like colors. Is this really a good idea? But yeah, it's like a spell work thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's something symbolic about this big black pot of goo that sometimes smells funny or really nice and fermented in a sweet way or whatever, and like pouring your sorrows into the black goo and dyeing clothes that are perfectly fine that would have gone to the landfill, and how symbolic that is in itself of renewing and taking part of like the wasteland of our culture and making it beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, so much of like what I'm interested in is like a scavenger culture, which is something that I've seen and experienced in other countries that I've spent time in and have felt really inspired by, is just making use of what's available, and yeah, particularly in this crazy culture that we live in, making beautiful things with other people's trash or what would otherwise be discarded.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. I mean, we're so encouraged to buy new things all the time and the newest styles, and yeah, there's definitely a trend right now towards like buying new handmade things that other people made that are really expensive because they take a lot of time to make and they're really precious, but it's a fine balance between like, okay, am I going to spend a bunch of money on like a special handmade thing, a garment that I might wear the rest of my life, and maybe some of those things are okay to like purchase or trade or whatever, but also I find myself there too, where I just feel like there's a lot of really beautiful things out there that you can customize or do spells on or turn into your own without having to spend like hundreds of dollars, you know.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm all about supporting the crafts folk, and yeah, even the more I learn about sewing and stuff, it is like so appealing to yeah, make garments from scratch. And also, I keep coming back to, there are just so many clothes in the world, specifically. And, yeah, mending and reworking and
That's a whole
giving
art
me
in
life.
itself, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When I was making paper for a workshop, we went to the bins as well to collect garments that have natural fibers to make paper with, which is actually the original paper that was like the first paper ever from China or from that region, from a certain region in China, was old garments that people had thrown into a pot of water, or like it sat in a vessel and then it rotted and turned into this pulp, and they were like, oh, so the first paper is made from old rotting garments. It's pretty
That's
crazy.
cool.
Yeah.
Rotting
Hemp,
garments.
actually.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just something I just thought of. The bins thing, you know. And if you don't know what the bins is, they're not everywhere, but they're like the big Goodwills. Everyone knows what Goodwill is, I feel like, but it's like an extra large Goodwill, but there's like a special room where it's just everything's thrown together. And
Yeah, they often call them like the outlet stores. So it's like a outlet store, or it's sometimes called an as-is store, and it's basically like a huge warehouse space where they roll out bins with piles and piles of clothes and things and shoes and all this stuff, and that people dig through it, pickers digging through, finding the treasures, and I think a lot of people resell stuff, but also it's like a great way to get really cheap clothing, and yeah, it's all by the pound for the most part.
yeah, the culture we live in and how we're encouraged to be a part of that cycle of like making income and then spending it on things like clothes, amongst many, many other things. And so I always appreciate hearing how people do their own version of scavenge, you know. And your business name is Scavenge Magic, which I think is amazing, especially hearing what you say about putting spells into your black goo.
Yeah, particularly like the birth of this project for me was actually because I was gathering nuts to eat that fall on the river in town. And yeah, that I've just been really inspired by the community of people that I've met around scavenging and, eating out of dumpsters and harvesting food from the in-between spaces. And, just funny you're saying too that the ways we're taught to be such consumers. And yeah, I come from like a crazy background of working in retail and, worked at some of the just most evil retail corporations and, have been very entrenched in that mentality and also
Pressure to sell.
Yeah, and also like have been the worker that cleans up that store. And it's extreme. It's led me down this path where I am today.
You also have a big thing with food, and I know when I first met you, you had just done like a training. I don't really remember what it's called. You can maybe tell me, but the food culture and scavenging, I mean, there seems to be an intersection here for you between foraging instead of buying or somewhere on that spectrum, and food too. And I mean, an intersection between food and craft in that sense of scavenging,
Yeah, absolutely. Food and so many aspects of our food system is what really just started to like rock my world and open my eyes to a lot of the injustices occurring, and that is so due to my the privilege that I carry. That really took some time for me to like see all those things. But yeah, it was food that really brought me into herbalism as well, as far as like food as medicine, and through all that, meeting all these people who just the like empowerment of gathering one's own food. And I'm like really also very excited about growing food.
We worked on a farm together or planted vegetables together at one point.
We sure did. Which I love. This is the first time I've actually been like gardening again solidly really since then. And in that way, I guess that's where the like foraging comes in for me, is just being a traveling person and really wanting to just maintain or like build up a level of empowerment around knowing where my food is coming from, and just meeting a lot of people who spend a lot of time and find a lot of importance in that, and just what an ancient human thing to gather food with friends and to process food and all of those things. And for me, there's just also so many conversations there that are important around being a traveling person and harvesting food and knowing who else is harvesting there and whose land are you on, and what is the history with this food source and what are the traditions around it, and all of that is so important to me, and a lot of why I'm often trying to specifically focus on harvests of things that are either in so-called invasive or naturalized or just very abundant, or whatever that looks like.
Because some of the things that I know you do, wild rice, which you don't harvest from a place where it actually was wild originally, but was like an abandoned rice farm lake thing. And then, tell me about that.
Yeah, it was introduced there to that area, and it does really well there, and I think it was introduced in like the 30s or something for waterfowl, and had a commercial processing facility there for a long time, then no longer operates, and isn't a traditional food in the region. So there isn't a lot of people harvesting or processing there. And we've been going for a few years now to celebrate and harvest and process that rice.
And that's a different, in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, where rice is wild and very big part of the culture, native culture of that place. It's like a different thing. That's where I've harvested the one time I have. And when I didn't really even think about that, because I was like, there's so much of this rice. But I don't know if it's becoming more popular or just the times are changing where we need to be more aware. We should have already been more aware, Yeah. And so I think, it feels different there, even though I don't know. I don't really know what the answer is, whether like colonizers or white folks should harvest rice in places where it's a traditional food of the native peoples or not, because that's a complex conversation that also depends on the plant, depends on what they say.
It's so personal. I think, it's like the awareness is huge, and I haven't been to that region. I, at this point, would be really hesitant, mostly just, thinking about, like, have I been invited here, or what is my relationship to this place, and I'm always thinking about that with where we do go and harvest, and also that currently those rice beds in Minnesota are very highly threatened by more pipelines. So like that too, that like if you anywhere really, but if you are going to go benefit from the abundance of a place, are you going to be there to defend that place? What is your long-term relationship with that place? And it's one thing for us settler colonizer descendants and people who carry that privilege, that like we can just like go in and out of that space and like go there and leave, and like it's really romantic seeming, but that for people who maybe have wanted to leave that area but can't, or that there's much deeper and bigger ties to that land, and any land that we visit. And I feel like it's really important to be very aware of that, and not just aware, but also like actively seeking ways to mitigate that.
And this week we've been harvesting blackberries, and I'm pretty sure they're mostly invasive, so-called invasive blackberry species in Oregon.
They do well here.
And they're very sweet and tasty and abundant, so... and grow in between everything.
Yeah.
And on top of everything.
They're one of those ones that, they're everywhere. They are making food actively. We should eat it. I really try not to, like, plan my life around harvests. I feel like... I don't know. That's a complicated statement, because also there, it's a part of being a human, planning life around harvest, and it actually feels really good to connect with that. Of like, my life literally revolves around this harvest. Like it's a yearly thing to go harvest and process enough rice to live on through the year, and
it's a weird thing thinking about that in the culture that we live in, where there's a private land ownership, that as a concept, and capitalism, and that all of your time has to be towards making money, any waking hour,
right?
Making money, feeding yourself, maybe watching some TV, right, and then going to bed and doing it all over again, just so you can just exist. So, and then trying to prioritize other things
like that are very human, that humans have been doing for so long, it almost feels like you're doing something wrong sometimes. Much, of course, the layer of colonizing that you talked about earlier is a thing to consider as well, but it's something that's come in my mind a lot. It's like, I feel like I'm not being a real adult, but yet I'm harvesting all this amazing food, you know.
Yeah, it runs deep in all of us, all of those things we've internalized from this capitalist culture that we have existed in and is all that we know. I think that's something that like has been so inspiring to me about the community that I've met around things like harvesting foods or scavenging of all kinds, even if that's, you know, just eating out of the dumpsters in your city, is that like time is more precious than money and food is more precious than money, and that
And your connection to it.
absolutely, and that itself, and your connection to the other humans that you're doing that with, and your connection to the place, and that all of that is so much a part of the human experience that we're very disconnected from. Specifically, you know, that's something that, like, it's a colonizing tactic that has been used for a very long time, is to disconnect people from their food sources and from the land. And
Then they're
that's
dependent.
how you create dependence, precisely. So reclaiming that in any small ways that we can, you know, whether that's eating out of a dumpster or picking the blackberries in the alleyway.
Or the fruit trees that are now in the middle of the suburbs.
Yeah.
Which
Fruits are
I've been
coming.
doing a lot in California. It's like crazy.
Yeah, it's something I love about the West Coast, how abundant the fruit is in the cities. But yeah, that's huge, and it is, something that's available in many different ways. And also it's something like, as for myself, as someone with settler, colonizer, white skin privilege, that I think about a lot, that like I am very able to do these things and choose this lifestyle, and that how available is that to all people, and like how to really address that in the ways that I move about.
Yeah, there's places where they're considered food deserts because grocery stores won't move there, even though there's people there. And why that is, I mean, it's really complex, but also really simple. They just don't think they can make have enough business there, or I don't know, like there's, yeah, the way that they do that, and not just cities, but in weird suburbs. I've seen it in the Midwest too, and where the only places to buy food are like a convenience store.
Sure.
You
I mean,
know?
and that sort of starts with like the monocrop culture. Most things in the convenience store are probably made from corn, you know, and probably a lot of those people, I mean, at least in the Midwest, live in the cornfield, you know, or like it's just that, like, that disconnect of the land, like start there, and then that also turns into like just a literal disconnect from even being able to buy groceries, you know, fresh vegetables. It's all tax control. Mm-hmm. I mean, the more I learn about all of it, it's kind of terrifying. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying how blatantly contrived it all is, and how brainwashed most people are to it.
And you're so aloof. I mean, I was aloof growing up to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's specifically, that's part of the control, is specifically keeping people
And seeing it.
yeah, in that mindset about it, and just taking away power.
What do you feel like has been the biggest thing, this just made me think of this, that you've learned from being kind of a traveler, mover, not just living in the same town your whole life and never leaving?
Oh, big question.
Because I guess you've been doing that since you were 2, apparently.
Yeah. I think one of my biggest takeaways is that maybe seeing like the similarity of so many places, and also like just how in so many ways like so many places are lovely, and that there's always potential for connection. I think that's the biggest thing for me is, whether I'm staying in the suburbs, or whether I don't spend a lot of time in cornfields. So, but I'm sure it's possible there too. That there is bits of connection and ways to make those connections everywhere.
The connections to the land,
to the earth, to the plants, to the animals, to the elements. That's available everywhere, and that it's actually like the blockages within ourselves that keep that from happening, which are very specifically contrived and often feel out of our control, but that there is opportunity for connection. It's interesting though, I do go back to particularly like where I grew up, and everything, although there is so much little wild bits, the like it's there, the level of control is scary, the landscaping,
the cement
and the cement and the landscaping really freaks
the
me
grass
out. The like
in Colorado.
mowed in concentric circles, and just that like grip of control is really extreme to witness after being away from it.
Yeah.
But which makes it for me so much more joyful to find those moments of like chaos, within that. Just plants growing freely, or places where the prairie dogs still have full reign of the meadow, or things like that. But it's tricky, the concepts of wildness, and especially the ways that we see them in this country, because it does have such a fucked up history, and that everything that I'd say, most everything that people considered wildness, even back when it was incredibly pristine, was quite tended. And so, like, we're not separate from that, and it's part of that.
The word wilderness, or like the concept of wilderness, is a colonizer idea anyways,
Yeah, absolutely.
At the same time, I find myself, I'm like staying in Eugene with a wonderful friend, the train's going by every hour, and there's noises everywhere, and I just like put my hand on my face, and I'm like, get me out of here. I want to go to the wilderness where it's quiet, or where somehow like the sounds that are happening, and like the way, like whatever the energy is in the air that feels like it's not just humans trying to control everything, or like all the things that we've imposed upon the land is not so overpowering. There is a real sense of, though those lands have been inhabited by humans, so they're not like separate from where humans should be per se, there's a sense of calm that you can't find. And I think also living in the so-called United States, that's like so-called North America, that's like kind of rare. I mean, in some places, you're in Europe or something, for example, like or India, there's no place to go to be away from humans and human-controlled landscapes. And so we're very lucky that we can just drive our little tiny house caravan things into the woods and like be like, okay, now I feel calm.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is like a visceral feeling of non-human controlled forest, or any type of environment that is so important, and is something I think a lot about too, the access to that, as I try less and less to drive vehicles mostly just living in my vehicle parked on friends' land and using a commuter car to get around, and still wishing I didn't have to use a commuter car to get around, and feeling really hard feelings about the like desire or need to get in a car and drive somewhere to experience that feeling of non-human controlled environment. And even here, like, this piece of land is adjacent to, I think it's like 300 acres of private timberland owned by Weyerhaeuser. And so really, like, we can just walk back there as far, pretty dang far, but it's a different feeling. It's a very human-controlled enviment. It's the planted forest. Yeah, it's a monocrop. It's monocrop culture. Those are all, a few acres back there. They're all the same age planted firs, which is so much of like the West, and specifically where I've been living in the West, the coastal range.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit to that? Because, neither one of us grew up here, and it takes time to learn what's happening in a place like the logging culture in the Pacific Northwest, would you? Whatever you do know.
I've only been here a few years, but yeah, like I just said, have been mostly living sort of on the coast range, which is a place where trees grow very fast, and is where, I don't know specifics, but is where a lot of the timber for this country and just for export is grown. And mostly it's fir out here, so a lot of the hardwoods come from other places. But, specifically also living on the coast last year in a port town where, huge log yards and then huge barge ships come every so often and load up and take them probably mostly to China to get processed. And then they might even come back here as lumber, which is insane. But yeah, I always find it interesting when people, newcomers come to somewhere like Oregon and they're like, wow, it's so green here. And, yes, it is. It's beautifully lush here. It's amazing, amazing territory. And most of what you see is planted, like mostly planted trees. And a lot of places, specifically around here in this county, seems really bad, but really everywhere in the Coast Range, that it's just a patchwork of clear cuts and of planted trees and trees that are destined to be clear cut. And it's devastating. As someone, I can't obviously speak from any sort of other experience of someone who grew up here or has any connection with logging culture, and I imagine that's very different. But I found myself just shocked by the just how prevalent the clear cutting and the patchwork is
It's
out
literally
here.
gridded, and like every other one could be logged or something.
Yeah, and sometimes you're driving down the road too, and it's like an entire mountainside has recently been clear cut, and when you really look at like the scale of it, it's just like, it's so alarming to a body that like the scale of that cut, it's multiple little watersheds, or that like it's literally just the entire mountainside has been razored, like there is nothing left there, everything's exposed. And as someone who has spent a lot of time tromping around just the smallest places, these little watersheds can have so much abundance and just precious plants, and types of endemic orchids, or food, all types of food, and food for so many creatures. And to see that just completely devastated and exposed
Without a care,
is really extreme. And just to me, just still completely blows my mind the like equipment that is necessary for that level of cutting and processing of trees, you know, like these are like steep hillsides, and just I can't even wrap my mind around how they even cut all those trees down. But that's very much the reality of living here. And for me, after living a few different places where I've been lucky enough to live quite near some really beautiful forests, even if they were young forests out east, they're still mixed in a way that is refreshing. But yeah, that it was really hard for me to like first come out here and experience that, and also felt really important for me as a person who lives in this culture and benefits from things like paper products, that like this is the reality of it. Like if you can't handle living by the clear cuts, then like probably you shouldn't benefit from the clear cuts, you know. And it's like anything, like a fracking well or this road, or you know, that, you know, literally like multiple times an hour logging trucks are flying down this road in front of us in both directions.
There's probably been a few since we've been on this interview that you probably heard, because this recorder picks up the road.
That's really like to
far over there.
They like to engine brake during this stretch too. It's really charming.
Oh, wonderful. It reminded me, hearing you talk about this experience living up here, I feel like the Piedmont and on the East Coast, which you have a relationship with down where your dad lives in North Carolina, but in Virginia, where my family's from, in the Piedmont region, logging is a big thing. And it's similar in a way to like just huge cuts of forests, and it's been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years because colonization happened there a long time ago, or a lot longer than the West Coast, I'd say. And I found myself growing up kind of longing for a place where there wasn't so much disturbance. There'd be like white pine groves planted and just, and not until I moved to New Hampshire for a little while did I experience, because so much of New Hampshire has been reforested from like a sheep grazing culture that then just like busted in a few years, and a lot of it's just come back and you can just wander. Everyone has a forest in their backyard, you can wander. Anyhow, there was a grove near my parents' house that I found at one point in my late teens, and I would just go there. I just went on my bike and I found it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this place. And it hadn't been cut in a long time, and I wandered in there and would find just to get away from my house and the things that are happening there, and like the stress of school and peers and like just all the stuff you go through in high school. And then I went to college, and I brought my then partner home with me, and I was like, I gotta take you to this grove. And we biked over there, and they had cut the whole thing down. And I got so upset, and I cried, and we like put our bikes down the ground, and I was like, oh no. And they had left a few trees right at the edge of the road, but there was nothing left. And I was just like, why do you need to cut everything, you know? Like, leave some stuff. I mean, I know the culture we live in, it's like, I don't know. I mean, people gotta make money, right? Like,
it's all about
we live in capitalism. But I have also seen sustainable logging. And I didn't even know we were going to be talking about all this on this interview, but we talk about all kinds of things, so we might as well. But I have seen where people selectively log a tree here and there and keep the forest infrastructure, you know. Anyhow, it sucks when you... And it was not that big of a forest, but it was just enough to bring me peace, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's precisely that, you know, that's been happening to people's for a long, long time. That, like, control of resources, which, yeah, now is very much about money and, you know, has always been about the control of resources.
Power.
And power. But that, like, yeah, to take that, I mean, and the fear of the earth, and the fear of the witches, and the fear of the feminine, you know, the fear of the rot, and
the wild is a symbol of that.
Yeah, all of those things, you know, like that connection that you were building with that forest, that's scary to those powers, you know, and not that that's why they cut it, but that's, you know, it's an aspect of the control, and that, yeah, oh, sorry, it's devastating. It's like, hearing stories of, I have friends who do a lot of amazing forest defense work in the Coast Range, and they do a lot of survey work and, are kind of on the books doing survey work for some, that for the Forest Service and for the BLM. And then they're also doing a lot of volunteer surveys, and they're mostly keeping track of marbled murrelets, which are keynote species on the coast and need old growth to raise their young. And yeah, stories after stories after stories of places that they've gone and, a year later, just completely cut. And, places where they, spend time with old growth and they, find these, precious birds and then are completely cut.
And there's still old growth that they are letting get cut.
Oh, yeah.
That's what is crazy to me.
It's shocking. I mean, there's people actively, actually, maybe it's tomorrow, gathering down in Humboldt that there's been some blockades of some of the last old growth down there.
Redwoods there.
Yeah, I think it's some redwood forest. It's like the Mattole. I don't really know how to say it. That Humboldt Redwood Company or something like that, trying to go in and build roads and cut things down. And I mean, at this point, especially in the Coast Range, and I mean, God, especially of the redwoods, but I mean, it's a very, very, very small percent, like 2% or, under 5% of old growth remaining. And yeah, to me, it's just how do we not see that as a precious resource? How can we be so, just dumb as a species?
To the interconnection of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. That, how crucial those old trees and that, that type of community is for everything, for our own existence. And, that, yeah, we have enough tree farms. Plenty of tree farms. We don't need to, start new tree farms and grow, and that, yeah, it's just...
I also had a friend in my hometown area take me to an old growth, or we think is an old growth, grove. And I was so in awe. It's very, very top secret, so, maybe I shouldn't even be mentioning that it exists at all on this. It's not protected, but this person had rights to go onto the land, and they took me there, and I was just enamored by the plants that I didn't expect to see in the Piedmont, and how large the trees were, and the fish species in the river, and
yeah, that's very rare out there.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, the area around where my dad lives is being cut at an alarming rate. Mostly for development, actually, but yeah, similarly, it blows my mind of in some of the last even intact forest in the Ha River watershed, and that there's no value on it as a forest, that there's value in the land as people see it for development, but that there's no inherent value of a forest.
Unless it's going to be cut for wood.
Right.
It's such a different thing on the East Coast. I mean, the mountains are one thing, but in the Piedmont in specific, where we both have a relationship, it's just flat and easily developable and farmable, so there's just not much effort made to protect anything. I don't know. I don't see why didn't they just put that in a preserve or something?
Every bird makes its nest, and every deer
book right now?
Um,
Just curious.
yeah, I've been doing a little bit of summer reading, which feels really good. I love books and have been a really avid reader for most of my life, especially from a pretty young age of like going on these long summer trips to visit my dad and not having really like regular kid summers where I had like friends and stuff. So I just read books. And yeah, right now I'm reading a few books. I just started reading a book, Apocalyptic Witchcraft. It's serious. I'd say I understand about 40% of it. It's a little bit over my head. But yeah, I'm very much like a nonfiction reader, and do a lot of book learning, and yeah, I felt really inspired by a lot of like plant books and a lot of books about witchcraft and books just like learning history from books that I never learned in school, or learning just like being able to explore my own interests in ways that institutionalized learning never really supported me in. I recently, I guess it was more this spring, I read the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, which I highly recommend to anyone, really, but certainly people who live in the United States, because it's alarming. Just the difference of what we've been told versus the realities. And I feel like that's often like what I'm looking for with books, is to expand my understanding of other people's experiences.
Cool. Thanks for the suggestions.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to read the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States myself, so I'm also interested in if you had to name what are the one or two most defining experiences or times of your life, what would they be?
Oh gosh. Defining experiences. That's a big question, Kelly.
I know what you've told me at times in the past, so I'm just curious how you're going to answer now, because here we are now in a different time. But
Yeah. Gosh, in that overarching way, certainly going to herb school was a game changer for me. Just like literally in like that decision and that year, and all of the things that transpired thereafter, like just completely changed the course of my life.
And you studied with Juliet at the Chestnut School of Herbal Medicine with me at the same time.
At the same time, that was in 2012, and that was huge for me and really was a big game changer. And really just each year after that has kind of like had its own big aspects. But the year after that spring, I went and visited my dad, who was living in Ghana he was there for a year and a half or so, and I just went to visit for 5 months. And that certainly was a transformative experience of my adult life. Just incredibly, rich with meaning and experience and learning, and a lot that I've like really just learned since too. And then I'd say like also the when I left North Carolina, the decision to move away from North Carolina, and I had built a wooden camper shell on the back of my Volkswagen pickup. And
It was so cute.
It was cute until it rotted in an Oregon winter, which was inevitable. But built it to go to the desert, and that worked out well. But that experience of just really striking out in that way, and like which I'm sure you have some understanding of at this point, of being a solo female identified person traveling in that way across this country is
And breaking down in the
oh
middle
yeah,
of the desert.
breaking down everywhere. I didn't know anything about driving a 35-year-old diesel truck, and I sure learned a lot. But yeah, just I think for me, like that year, I spent more time by myself than I ever had before in my life. And
I forgot that you had studied with Julie, what's her?
Julie McIntyre is who I went to study with in New Mexico. And yeah, gosh, that in itself was life-changing. But yeah, just that aspect of spending so much time by myself and really like in that way being just really accountable to myself of like what my like day-to-day decisions were and like when I chose to go somewhere new or if I chose to hike this trail or whatever that was. Just yeah, all those like aspects of being solo in that situation. And
Was it summertime when you were in the Southwest?
yeah,
Was it super freaking hot?
It was pretty hot, but this down there, it's pretty far south where I was in New Mexico, and monsoon season comes sort of like midsummer. So yeah, the seasons are just different there, and so get sort of a reprieve from the heat as the rains come. But the rest, it was like record heat when I left there in August and drove out to California and up to visit friends and stuff and work, and that trip was insane. Just adopted a puppy and drove through the desert heat in my little janky truck. It was interesting.
I forgot about that truck until you mentioned it. It was so wonderful.
Oh yeah, it was
you
a
carried like a
character.
whole apothecary in there and
Yep.
you barely had room for yourself.
I had all my medicines in there. I had pretty much all my belongings, which mostly included medicines and books, and tiny little sleeping space. And yeah, it was really like that was a big transformative experience for me of like being self-sufficient in that way and yeah, exploring the edges of my comfort zone in so many ways.
We both have had some times like that in our lives. I feel like I've been on like kind of a perpetual road trip for a couple years now.
Oh yeah.
And eventually it starts to be like, all right, you need to have time to process.
Oh yeah. Something that it's actually interesting being on this land. This is sort of where I landed somewhat unintentionally after many months and many miles of solo travel, and just recognizing as I like ended up staying here for that winter that I was sort of recovering from being in a perpetual state of panic, really, like especially just aspects of like not trusting my vehicle and like just like what that does to a nervous system. It's like actually over time like really intense. And it like I grew in so many ways and like pushed my limits and like surprised myself with my abilities in so many ways, and also still feel like I'm recovering.
That's something to hear. I wonder how long it's gonna take me if I ever stop moving around. But
I think you got a different level of home space than I did though. I couldn't even sit up in my bed.
yeah, I can stand, I can cook, I can.
Being able to be inside when it's raining, that's huge. Because now I'm like living in a similar small space. We don't move around, but it doesn't take much. But being able to cook and work on something indoors in weather.
Shelter is real.
Yeah. Oh my God. Building out this tiny truck that we live in. It's an 8x10 box. And
A box truck.
yeah, that literally like having that come into like feeling like a home space, like just realizing like how little shelter it actually takes to feel just huge amounts of
Relief.
Yeah, it's like, it was just amazing. And like just so much like, wow, this is a human right, like this level of shelter. And it's fucking absurd that that's not something that's accessible to all people.
I mean, it's a wake-up call to go to Eugene and stay in town, and like half the population is homeless. And housing prices are not getting any lower anywhere, and it's just, it's intense. And it's just like, what are all the reasons why this is happening, you know? And like, why aren't there places for these people to be?
Oh, absolutely.
And like, what it must be like. I mean, just someone was like taking a nap out of their car in the middle of the street practically. It's just,
Yeah, I mean, so many of the West Coast cities, and I'm sure many other places also, it's becoming a pretty big issue where people who've maybe lived in that place their whole lives suddenly can't afford to live there anymore and are living in RVs and vehicles. And I think places like LA recently like made it illegal to live in RVs in the city of LA, and just things like that, that, I mean, it's criminalizing poverty, you know, which homelessness has always been an aspect of that, you know, criminalizing poverty. And but that people are forced into these scenarios and then continually criminalized for it in ways that are just terrible.
yeah, we don't really have any kind of safety net in this culture, and a lot of people feel like we shouldn't have a safety net, that it's just too bad if you can't keep up, you know. But the whole system's not really designed for, I mean, the things that can just happen on accident, you know. And capitalism is not designed for everyone to be middle upper class. It's just the way it is. So there's always going to be,
specifically for just the special few, you know.
there's always going
always
to be a
been that
lower
way.
class, and what does that look like, and what does that mean, and like, how do we navigate that, and how do we have compassion for, I mean, it's just,
And also, like, how do we rise up, you know? Like, there's so many more of us who are out here living in vehicles and can't afford rent and, you know, are scraping to get by, that, how do we take it back, you know? Like, take back the means of our own existence and, like, empower ourselves to find ways to gather our own food, or to meet whatever small need it is that we can meet without the like reliance on these like oppressive external structures. And that, yeah, to me it's like the things that I do is just, that's what I'm going for, taking it back.
cool. Well, what are you feeling like you're going to do with all your your growing collection of silk slips dyed all beautiful colors?
Well, that's specifically so we can all look fabulous while we burn it all to the ground. Yeah, I mean, I am really excited about these garments getting back out into the world as something that's been changed, and through like the type of like just like very like practical and basic like ritual spell work of like boiling, and often like doing that over a fire, that specifically for me I am really excited about. Yeah, people who live in poverty, or people who are marginalized in whatever sorts of ways, looking fabulous. And
What are you telling me about you have this really beautiful trunk, carrying your trunk around and just opening it up and watching everyone try on everything is like what it's all about.
it's the dream. And yeah, I constantly have a hard time with that, as you know, which we were just talking about, the like late capitalist concept where we all need to like sell ourselves online or something in order to survive. And you know, it'll probably look like that somewhat, because I'm trying to survive. But also, yeah, for me, in a lot of ways, the dream is to just be able to, like, see the joy in someone as they, like, put on a beautiful garment that looks amazing on them. Or to even be able to, this little studio setup we have right now where we got, like, sewing machines set up to make it fit you if it doesn't, and that type of thing. And I'm really excited about the concept of offering just like varying cost or trades, or just like really looking at the
Different ways to think about it.
types of new economy, to use like weird words, but that just the ways that we can support each other that isn't necessarily just specifically selling ourselves online, and what that can look like. And in an ideal world for me, that would look like having people who do have access to funds paying what they would pay for some other beautiful garment, knowing that would sort of pay it forward for someone who would never spend more than $10 on a garment, and to me, like, wanting those things to be just like wickedly accessible to especially to femmes, just, and anyone who like is brave enough to be femme in this world.
Well, I think that's a nice place to stop. Thanks, Amy, for sitting down with me. We've had to move around a little bit in the forest to find quiet or semi-quiet spots, with your dog circling around us a few times wanting to play. And I have a few of your garments too, and they're pretty wonderful. I like them. Well, thanks for doing the interview with me, and let's go eat some dinner.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, y'all, to this conversation with Amy Armantrout. And the interstitial music for this episode is another song from Mother Marrow, who sings the kind of music at the beginning and end of the podcast that you hear every episode. And the song is called Son of Man. You can find it on her Bandcamp page. And Mother Marrow is also working on a new album, so I would follow them on Instagram and see kind of the status of that project. I've been looking forward to when they finally put out new music, so I've been watching. I also want to just note here at the end of this episode that the Ground Shots podcast and the bigger Ground Shots project is totally grassroots funded, and right now this means that the cost of this project is totally funded from Patreon, and support through that platform right now is the best way to give financial space and possibility to this project, and it does not yet pay for itself. So if you appreciate this project and have the means, joining the project on Patreon really helps me out immensely. I've put a lot on Patreon over the last year and a half, and when you join, I try to keep everything accessible at the lower tiers as much as possible, but there's definitely goodies at the upper tiers for sure. But there's like a backlog of writings from zine projects I've been working on, observation journals from the road, extra educational content, and recordings from past podcast guests. So when you join us on Patreon, you also get access to a lot of extra stuff. So if you're into it, join us there. It would be really sweet. I would love to have you. I just want to say thanks again for listening, and also happy spring. Really hope everyone's getting their gardens in, or at least admiring all the spring flowers. And I think, that's it. So until next time, y'all. This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.